and the Health and Human Services Committee. We ask that you turn off your cell phones and keep them off while the hearing is in session. I'm doing so now. I'm getting little buzzes. I am the committee chair, Senator Patty Pansing Brooks, representing Legislative District 28, right here in the heart of Lincoln. I will now have the other senators introduce themselves, starting on my left and then going right. Senator Berman.
I'm Senator Dave Merman, District 38, now representing 7 counties, part of an 8th.
My name is Lynn Walls, and I represent Legislative District 15, which is all of Dodge County and now part of Valley.
John Arch, I represent Legislative District
3, which is Adams County, Phelps and Kearney County.
Senator John Lowe, District 37, still the southeast quarter of Buffalo County.
Steve Lathrop, District 12.
Thank you. Welcome to everybody. We're just getting a couple new names here, so sorry. Also, there are members of the, these are the members of the Yrtc as well as the HHS committee. So, and our committee clerk today is Jerry Williams. And we also have legal counsel Paul Henderson with us. And our new, I'm not going to say new check, but I had to. Our new check, Steve Ramos. Welcome to you. Thank you for being here. So today's testifiers are here on an invitation basis, so I will call them up as their time comes. And first we have, though, Larry Call, who will come and introduce. And Director Call, please come forward. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you so much. As odd as it may sound, very pleased to be here with you guys today. Thank you for the invitation. I also wanted to start this morning. Larry Call, do I need to do the whole thing?
Yes,
Okay,
thank you.
Larry Call, Larrykahl, Chief Operating Officer for the Department of Health and Human Services. I wanted to start by thanking you guys, and Senator Pansing Brooks in particular, with the Oversight Committee for coming out and touring this fall. Tremendous opportunity, I think, both for our legislators to be able to see the work that's being done, and it was very gratifying and rewarding for the staff as well. They were very pleased to be able to share some of their accomplishments and the hard work that they've been doing. Also, a special thanks. The projects that have been completed with the consultants would not have been able to be accomplished without the involvement of the Department of Administrative Services, Michelle Potts and her team working in tandem with Department of Health and Human Services. Our team was Connor Grease from Central Operations and Material Services, Dr. Janine Fromm as the Executive Chief Medical Officer, and Mark LeBachardier as the Administrator of the Office of Juvenile Services. The process that we went through in terms of kind of walking through this was obviously many thanks to you all for putting forth LB 428 and incorporating the request in LB 380 for the work to be done from our consultants on the Kearney campus and to review the Lincoln campus for and the feasibility for PRTF. The oversight overview was really that the DHHS team gathered in May, and we started to map out the process. In June, the team expanded to include DAS, and our goal was to map the shortest possible process to a successful outcome. Given the statement of work and our timeline, the work was divided into 3 different statements of work. One project for LB 380 and the Kearney campus that was large enough to require a request for proposal process, and then 2 scopes of work for LB 428. The statement of work was really different enough and unique enough that we broke it out into the feasibility work and then the cost analysis and structural analysis work. DAS followed the state requested, the state required proposal for an RFP, sought bids. I think we had 7 different vendors. So we had 7 proposals working with the DAS team. We whittled it down to 3, and then we had live interviews on campus and did a panel interviews with scoring. And so our independent scoring brought us to, for the RFP work for the LB 380 and the Kearney campus work, was Carlson West Pavondra. And we have with us today Al Pravanda, principal from that organization, that will be able to help answer any of your questions. He had also used as a regular partner and consultant, kind of a national expert in juvenile facilities, Karen Chin of Chin Planning. And Karen will be available to us today via phone. She's not able to be here in person, but the other statement of work, interestingly, the vendors were selected for the other two components of work from the approved vendor list. The dollar amount was low enough that we could go direct to contract and didn't need to do an RFP process. And so we started searching the list. It's a pretty comprehensive list. And based off of the walkthrough and looking again at the contractors that were had the skill set that we were looking for, we awarded the projects to Mike Yrtc from the Altus Architectural Engineering Group, and then Karen Chin with Chin Planning. And interestingly, while we knew Karen was a part of the Carlson West Provandra bid process, we had selected her independently prior to her coming on. So there were some economies in that she was able to serve both projects at the same time. So the outcome was final vendor, Carlson West Provandra, special assistance from Chin Planning, and then the other two groups that we had talked about. And we rolled up our sleeves and got busy. We engaged them later in July, early August. Contractors mobilized late August and into September. And this was a pretty good sized lift. There was no lollygagging. We were very focused in terms of the statement of work that needed to be done and the time frame that needed to be done in. And my deep thanks and appreciation to the contractors that we worked with that you'll hear from today. They were rock stars, hit the targets, hands down, with what I believe to be high quality work. So for me, always a big issue is on time and under budget, and we were able to accomplish that. So I'm very pleased to keep my record going of getting projects in on time and under budget. And with that, unless you have any other specific questions for me, I would turn us to the experts, where I think you'll really get the meat out of the conversation to inform your questions.
Thank you. Any questions? Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Mr. Kale, for being here. The new design of the housing units, will that save in staff by putting them all on one level? Or what's the reasoning of one level compared to two levels?
Mm-hmm. And again, our consultants may be able to speak to this even more articulately than I may be able to, but essentially, yes, that on one level with a well-designed layout, lines of sight are critical. And so with enhanced lines of sight, you can, in essence, decrease your staffing. You don't need as many staff to be able to observe, especially when you're looking at nighttime shifts. You know, instead of having people that need to be involved in each of the like around corners or unvisible areas, having better sight lines through current design is preferential, and also likely save in operating costs in addition to the staff costs.
And I believe the cost will be something like $13,336,000. Where do you see the money coming from?
I think that there are a limited number of options. The state capital improvement process, I think, is one that is most likely or very likely. That's our traditional process. I have also put in a request for ARPA dollars, at least for the architectural and engineering component of the process. But that's yet to be determined. I think you all have a voice in that. So those would be the two avenues that I could think of at this point in time.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Yes, Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Is your request for ARPA dollars going to be included in the governor's request for ARPA dollars, or is it something that these committees are going to have to consider putting forward on your behalf?
The formal request that I had moved forward was for architectural and engineering as a portion of, because my initial understanding was that there was a hesitancy to get into bricks and mortar, or where there may be additional costs. I know that my understanding is that the governor's been sensitive to not wanting to add additional long-term infrastructure costs to the state. And so I had initially submitted for just the architectural and engineering component. But it's certainly, if the governor's office saw fit to make a full recommendation, they would be welcome.
Okay, so you're not, I guess what I'm hearing is you're not certain if it's going to be part of the,
Correct.
okay, thank you.
Anybody else? Just, I know that you're not really speaking today on behalf, either pro or con on on these reports. Is that correct?
Yes, I guess the statement I would make though is that I appreciate the work that's been done. I believe it's solid work, and I would stand behind the experts' recommendations.
Okay, thank you. And then just another thing that's just tangential, not really, it is regarding the reports. How's the hog barn being used? Do you know?
That's a stumper. No, I do not know at this point.
Okay, because they talked about it here and I've never even seen the hog barn.
I can
It's the
assure
oldest-
you that we're not keeping hogs.
How about children?
No children in the hog barn.
Okay, good.
Likely, Senator, would be storage supply.
Okay, it's the
equipment warehouse.
oldest building on campus, and so that's why and then could you also explain about the tunnel system? What is that tunnel system? I didn't know there was
Yes.
a tunnel system, and are children taken down to this tunnel system?
They actually were this last week.
Okay.
Couple days
For the
ago.
tornado?
For the tornado drill. They were brought down into the tunnels. There's I think wisely, architecturally, central plant, when you've got a number of larger older buildings that were steam heated, there was a central heat plant that then would feed all the steam to all the buildings. And so there
Okay.
was a tunnel system used to be able to feed that.
Sort of like the Capitol.
And interestingly, if you look from an aerial perspective, where the sidewalks are is where the tunnels are.
Hmm.
And so the steam pipes help heat the sidewalks and reduce the snow and ice risk in our climate. So there are tunnels actually on our adult facilities as well. There are not, to my knowledge, on Whitehall campus, Lincoln campus, or there are still some tunnels perhaps on the Hastings campus. Most of those have been decommissioned as part of the viable process. When the buildings go, so go the tunnels. But Kearney does still have an active tunnel process.
Okay, but they are not used for children? Okay,
No.
punishment
No.
or rehabilitation
No.
or anything?
Matter of fact,
Okay.
it's a fairly extensive system of tunnels. And so really the only
That's what worried
authorized
me.
individuals
Okay.
is engineering.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, thank you very much. Thank you for
Absolutely.
coming today,
You bet.
COO call, appreciate it a lot. I don't see any further questions. Do you have a question? Oh, sorry,
Yeah,
Senator Walz.
thank you. And I may have missed this, but is there a timeline if this goes through? Is there a timeline for when this would be built?
Again, our consultants will be able to articulate that more clearly.
Okay,
My sense of it is that if dollars were available this year, a planning process could begin. Architectural engineering could be engaged. We could begin that process and could be ready to go to build perhaps as early as the fall, with construction maybe in 2023.
thank you.
I think Al Pravandra might be able to speak to that even, articulate that even better with his knowledge of construction cycles, available contractors in the state board.
And to clarify, that's on Yrtc Kearney,
Yes.
not on any PRTF.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That one might take a little longer.
Okay, just wanted to catch. Okay, thank you very much,
Absolutely.
COO.
Thank
call.
you.
Appreciate your coming today. And do we want to ask them any questions? I don't think so. We're good. Thank you. Okay, our first Okay, good. Our first testifier is Karen Chin, who's with Chin Planning. Good morning, Ms. Chin. Can you hear us?
Yes,
Wonderful. Thank you for coming. We're appreciative that you're here. And if you'd go forward on your testimony, we'd appreciate it.
I'm sorry, what?
Please go ahead and test with your testimony. Do you have testimony, prepared testimony?
No, I'm just here in case of questions, no.
Okay, sorry.
I can
There's-
take somebody to be on hold in case of questions, so.
Okay, wonderful. Senator Arch has some initial questions to begin with. Senator Arch.
Thank you. Yeah, this is John Arch, and I do have some questions. I guess what struck me in the report was I'm sorry, can you hear me?
I can hear, I'm trying to be, yes, like this is Karen Chin, I can hear, I think, can everyone hear me? Just nod your head, I had to mute the actual hearing.
I didn't understand.
I didn't either.
I'm so sorry. We couldn't hear you. So if you could speak just a
Can you hear
little
me
bit.
now?
Yes,
Okay, good.
yes. Okay. So I had submitted a number of questions, additional questions. I don't know if you had received those. Did you?
Yes, I did.
Okay. So I'd like to go through those if I could
Okay.
and ask you specifically about those. One had to do with the admission criteria for a proposed PRTF. One of the issues that I think your report points out, and we're certainly aware, is that there are certain youth that the private providers in the state are not able to accept because of either facility issues or program issues or a variety of other reasons. But those youth then are sent out of state to other PRTFs. And the question then is the admission criteria for a proposed PRTF, was there discussion of that as you did your report?
Yes, the admission criteria would be basically a no reject or eject policy, because that's the reason why kids are being sent out of the state. You have 162 PRTF beds in the state of Nebraska, but frequently youth are not, either the wait list or they're not Medicaid eligible or other reasons for, particularly for behavioral characteristics, they're not accepted into those programs, which is why they're going out of state. And so the criteria would be knowing that the youth that are placed out of state, that's very serious, mental health, substance use disorders, aggressive behavior, some physical health needs. Those are the youth that are being placed in out-of-state PRTF placements because they're not accepted into the private providers in the state. some time to put together. But in terms of the number of youth, on average that are in out-of-state placement for DHHS, that's in the report, it's about 30, but 12 on average of those are in out-of-state placement, and about 17 or 18 actually are placed in PRTF as in Nebraska. And then, of course, for probation, it's about 26 youth on a given day. And then they typically have a longer length of stay. So that information on your columns, or on the first one, last one, that information is in there. But the Medicaid drill down would be something that would have to come from both HHS and probation.
Okay, yeah, we will probably seek that information because that obviously goes to also operating costs or operating revenue and what the source of that revenue would be for a PRTF.
Yeah.
So are there other states, are you aware of other states that operate a PRTF similar to what we're proposing here?
I've been working in this field for about 37 years, and of course things change all the time. I've probably done 25 or 30 statewide master plans. And my answer to that is predominantly, if this is a private provider function, most states operate or contract with private providers. The issue that is facing Nebraska is not unique. It's throughout the United States. If there becomes a handful or a small number of youth that have serious mental health and behavioral health disorders, it makes it very difficult to handle in a group home or in a youth correctional facility like Kearney. And so, and they're more costly, as you can imagine, because the requirements and the staff, level of staffing and the amount of staff and the amount of professional staff required therapeutic staff to deal with this population of youth. So in most states, they are private providers. And the same issue about selection criteria and wait lists and not being able to get in, or exclusionary criteria for aggressiveness, fire starters, sex offenders, whatever it might be, is a problem that many states in this country are facing in terms of trying to place youth. And so typically I see these facilities are privately operated as they are in Nebraska.
Okay, thank you. One of the things I didn't see in the report was, I don't recall the exact number of beds, I think 24. Was it?
Recommended.
Yeah. What was the thought concerning the division of boys and girls? So, how many boys, how many girls are out of state, and how would that be arranged in a 24-bed facility?
Yeah, there was a very detailed snapshot back in early 2019 of the roughly 32 youth that were placed out of state. It did not break out male and female, but every place throughout the rest of the report where I had information on admissions, I broke it down by male and female, and it varies, but as you might expect, males are the majority, 75 to 80%, females are more 20 or 25%. The way the program was developed for a PRTF facility is there would be 3, essentially 8-bed housing units, single occupancy rooms, which is best practice, and evidence-based research, especially showing that the behavioral characteristics of this population, they'd be single individual sleeping rooms. But one of the housing units, the rooms were sized large enough to either accommodate if there needed to be a medical bed or some physical issues with a particular youth. They are oversized, but they also meet standard in terms of square footage where you could place 2 youth in a room if you needed to. Something like suicide ideation, or the operator would decide that whoever's running the facility there would say we need to have 2 youth in a room just for safety reasons. So the point of that is that you've got 3 ways to sort youth, and it's always a problem in small facilities, especially with a very small population of girls. But you would be able to, based on evidence and flow, if you had 4 girls in a housing unit, you could keep them there, and you'd have to move 4 boys over into the larger and make the other 8-bed unit, which all the space standards in the bathrooms are sized to accommodate. You can even take it up to 16, which you wouldn't want to do. I mean, that's a lot of kids dealing in a housing unit for this level of treatment need. But you could shift around because you've got basically 3 separate wings of a housing unit that you could store boys and girls. So you might have girls in only 4 girls in an 8-bed unit, but then the other 8-bed single, you have boys, and if you had to oversize that for a fluctuation of population, you could use the larger size housing unit to accommodate that.
So in essence, you've designed flexibility into the unit so that you can expand.
It would be a smaller number, but yes, that's the assumption. Instead of just saying it's one big 24-bed housing unit with all the rooms open out to the day room, it's divided into smaller pods or smaller units so that you can have that separation of male and female, or more aggressive youth with less aggressive, or younger boys with older boys, however you want to sort. For a small facility, it's 3 different abilities, housing units to be able to move those youth around.
Okay, thank you. Is the state, if the state is the operator, I should know the answer to this question, but if the state is the operator of the facility, is the state able to bill Medicaid?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay,
Yes, I mean, because there's already, there's Medicaid reimbursement for some of the in-placement, I said probation or HHS right now is already using some. On average, about 17 kids are actually in PRTS of the 162 licensed PRTS beds in Nebraska. And again, about 30 use of HHS or PLACE. 18 of them are in Nebraska already, but 12 are placed out of state, and Medicaid reimbursement is always applied. And then some youth are denied or, they're not eligible, whatever it might be, but they certainly are. The application for Medicaid is the first road to probation, and HHS goes down to see if they can get reimbursement.
okay. You did an analysis of cost. I didn't see, did I miss an analysis of revenue?
I didn't have an analysis of revenue.
Okay.
Medicaid decisions are made on a case-by-case basis. I have what has been spent on Medicaid compared to us. And so that's in the future, in terms of what we can assume is Medicaid. I don't know each individual case that would say if this youth eligible or they've been denied Medicaid. But certainly going into it, knowing the full cost of, roughly $3.8 million a year to operate, because as you saw, if you read the report, a high level of professional and therapeutic staff.
Right. So I want to talk about the cost for a second. So I guess then the answer would be that while that hasn't been estimated, there would be some offsetting revenue against those costs if the state is able to bill Medicaid, or perhaps there may be private insurance. There could be other sources of revenue.
Yes, that's
Okay,
true.
which would offset
I
the
guess
cost.
We could take it as a percent of what it is now, but there's no way that I could, I don't know in the future what kids are going to qualify for Medicaid and because it's basically on a case-by-case basis.
Right. Okay, that's fair. The cost basis that you estimated there, I'm assuming that is a fully staffed PRTF regardless of occupancy.
That's right, exactly, for 24 youth, yes. Mhm.
So you would assume that the units are full. There's no reduction of cost. That would be a fully staffed unit.
That's exactly right.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, my last question, which is probably a bigger question, more philosophical, I guess, it was the statement at the end of the report, and I know you're familiar with the statement. It's based on discussions with clinical and other treatment staff, the number of adolescents in placements could be reduced, especially if group home capacity increased in Nebraska. That statement stood out to me because, of course, the question raised is, well, maybe we shouldn't be talking about a PRTF. Maybe we should be talking about some higher level group homes. And of course, we are the part of this group is the Yrtc Oversight Committee. So we're involved in the Yrtc issues as well. We know that there's a group home being developed in Omaha that is a higher level group home. I guess I would be very interested in knowing your thoughts about that statement. The question that I have, of course, is, does this imply that some of the youth are placed in a PRTF do not necessarily need that level of care if alternative placement in a group home were available?
Well, group home, the availability is in the same boat with PRTF capacity throughout the United States. It's increasingly, as we move as a nation to reduce, as you know, dramatically the number of kids we admit to youth correctional facilities. And as we know, as a nation, we move towards trying to really reduce out-of-home placement. If we do that on the child welfare side, we try to find a relative or some other, kind of placement at an institution for the child welfare youth. As those numbers have gone down, the youth that remain in the system that have to be, are placed at Kearney or placed at PRTF or group home, increasingly have, as you looked at the report, sometimes at the age of 12, they've already had 10 out-of-home placements. They've had, serious issues with, exposure to trauma and aggressive behavior and all sorts of educational deficits coming into the system. Those youth are hard to place in group homes, and they're very hard to place in PRTF. I did say in the report that with the expansion of specialized group home, which is also going to be more costly, obviously, than a county facility because, again, the therapeutic staff, I just want to say, though, that my analysis of this was that there was on average 38 kids on a given day that were in out-of-state PRTS, and the recommendation was for a 24-bed facility. So if you thought that all, kids, everyone placed out of state was going to go into PRTS, I'm saying that initially, first of all, PRTS facilities tend to be smaller. And so, most of the ones that I've either worked on or planned are 20 to 24 beds because of the nature of the youth that are being placed there. I'm saying one for Nebraska, but that means that there are still will be other youth, and that's why I make that statement. I wasn't commissioned to do a group home analysis, but certainly as you develop more specialized group home care, like students in other states, some of those youth maybe could come back to the state, but you don't have that capacity in Nebraska. You still will need youth that are going to be in the most serious level of a psychiatric residential treatment facility, but some youth that maybe could qualify if you had really good specialized group home treatment could go into those kind of facilities also. So, I didn't say recommend a 38 or a 40-bed PRTF facility. I'm saying 24 beds, and to try to really work on getting those youth in the facilities, really looking at length of stay, which drives the average daily population. And by the way, youth that are placed out of state stay substantially longer in those placements than the youth that are placed in state in PRTF. So I've seen that across the country. I keep going to South Carolina, Nebraska, and they tend to stay longer. And so, looking at length of stay and trying to really have targeted, maybe shorter term interventions would be good in a specialized group home for some youth, but you still will need psychiatric residential treatment for the kids that have the most serious mental health and psychiatric disorders.
Well, and that's, specialized group home, not the average group home could handle these kids. But that's the issue is that, so I'll just ask you, why is length of stay longer for kids that are placed out of state?
Well, I've always said one of the things in all my work for 37 years, and not to be cynical, but if you're a private provider and you're getting $400 or $500 a day for a youth, and my question is, who's making the release decision to say this kid is better, it's time for this kid to come back? And I just believe it is harder to do logistically when they're halfway across the United States. They're not seeing their family. The family's not asking questions about, is it time for my child to come home? I've typically seen on states that have a heavy reliance on private providers a longer length of stay. And so, not to be cynical about it, it's there's no vested interest in saying, okay, they've been here 4 months or better, let's get them back to their state or back to their home. So I always see, and if you look at the report here, the use of out-of-state private providers, the length of stay is longer.
So my question though is as well, is this also a function of not having a place to move that youth, to step down that youth back to the state of Nebraska? There's nowhere to go. And so that was why I had that chart was, are we talking about, particularly when it comes to probation, are we talking about youth who are placed in a PRTF initially because they meet medical necessity, because there is treatment required, but then at some point that medical necessity ends, that determination ends, and then the child could be discharged from a PRTF, but there is no place for that youth to go. There is no place to come back to the state of Nebraska for that youth. And so probation picks up the payment from those dollars, not Medicaid. Is that, am I imagining that? Is that a possibility?
Yes, no, that's a very good statement. These youth, it's not that they're all fixed 100% better, and their families have all gone through therapy about how best to deal with the youth that have serious psychiatric problems. It's not as if they're going to come back and it's going to be easy to place, because the reason that they ended up in a PRTF facility, is that they have such multiple, serious mental health and other issues. And so having them come back if they've been to an out-of-state PRTF and coming back, I believe that some of the length of stay issues related to that also could be contributed to the fact that where are they going to go? Maybe it's not appropriate to come back to the family. As you can imagine, many of the youth that are placed in these facilities also have serious family issues and the ability to cope with dealing with a kid with psychiatric and other mental health and aggressive behaviors or whatever. So it's not as if every kid is going to come right back into a home setting. Some kids will not have a home setting to come back to, so finding some place to come back to for the state of Nebraska, like a specialized group home or specialized or professional parenting for foster care, some of those kinds of services to really reintegrate a kid back into a community, even if it's not back into their home, that is an issue, not unique to Nebraska. That if youth are in displacement, they will need to have some support networks and specialize in maybe a step down to come back and to reintegrate back into the community. And sometimes it will be with their family, and it needs to be in other kinds of places, more like a group, a specialized group home setting.
Yeah, and of course, some of that is driven by our payment silos, where Medicaid would pay for that medical necessity, the early days of the PRTF, but after that, then it would have to switch to general fund dollars. And so the specialized group home would be general fund dollars, not Medicaid eligible payments. Yeah,
Well, no, the specialized group home, that would depend, because if it's not a locked setting in the group home, there could be Medicaid reimbursement. And you do have some, I don't have it in front of me right now. Again, I mean, it certainly was brought up as an issue, and I wanted to put that in there, but it was the honest scope of my work to do an assessment just to be honest, just to do an assessment of group home facilities and utilization in the state of Nebraska. But because I've done this work around the country, and because it was brought up by clinicians I talked to in the process, I do know that is an issue. That's something else in the overall, and even kids that are placed at Kearney that are, getting towards the end of their placement there, the same issues apply. That it's not like they're going to go back to a correct setting in their home. That some of them will, but then some of them are going to need something else to step down to. And a specialized group home those can be Medicaid eligible places.
okay, I wasn't aware of that specialized group home could be Medicaid. Okay, yeah, because I think that there's probably more financial analysis that we need to do, particularly as we take a look at the cost of placing out. I mean, youth in the state, without a doubt, is better, closer to the family, closer to the community, without a doubt. The financial piece we have to do a little bit of analysis on, but those are my questions at the present time. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Arch. Very comprehensive. Appreciate it. Thank you. Any other questions from anybody? Ms. Chin, thank you for all this information. It's voluminously important and comprehensive, and I appreciate it, and I know we all do. I guess I'm just going back to one of Senator Arch's previous questions. So right now we're spending $9.1 million basically on out-of-state PRTF placements. Is that correct? That's what I'm seeing.
That's correct.
Okay. That was on page 31. But then on page 58, you talked about the total cost estimate is going to be about 3.8. And that's where you said to Senator Arch that we don't know how much we'll get back from Medicaid or other reimbursements, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So, and then the total to create a new unit, I'm having trouble finding that. I know I marked it, but I'm having trouble finding that.
The capital requirement?
Yes, the capital requirement. Could you please remind me what that was or what page that's on?
My report didn't speak to the capital cost. I believe, Mike, the architectural assessment, I did not do that. I was not the architect on the project, so.
Okay. So I guess one of my next questions, then I can reserve that for him, is that have there been any studies about recidivism or improvements or what kind of value it is to send a kid out of state versus keeping them here, connected to their homes and their families?
Well, I haven't seen any recidivism data on the exact population, the 38 youth that were in PRTF placements out of state. I can say this from my national work and my involvement with national child welfare organizations. We do know that the placing youth far, to not tie them into their family or community, to try to develop those ties when they come back, is very detrimental. In fact, the lowest recidivism rate is related to juvenile justice in the state of Missouri. I'm sure you may have heard of the Missouri model, where they decided 30 years ago to have small home-like facilities placed throughout the state. They operate about 30 facilities. And they have a very low recidivism rate because their point is to keep kids in their home community, and while they're incarcerated or they're in their small facilities, they're working very diligently to either work with families or whatever the family equivalent is, to have those youth visiting with family and to develop group therapy with family and youth so that when they do come out of the facility, they transition back and they have a lower recidivism rate. And one of the key links to that has to do with being close to their home community.
Okay, that's what I was presuming. So,
Right,
yeah, we just need to get some of that information because, when you look at costs, if people keep returning, it's just a revolving door and we're not solving anything and we're making at times matters worse. So, all right, well, I appreciate it. Senator Arch, you have another
I was
question?
just going to make one other comment, and that is that with regards to your question on capital, it appears as though the analysis, and I think we'll have a representative from
Yeah.
CWP, but
Yes,
they did the analysis of do you renovate certain buildings, do you build new? And I think building new was about 14 million for the
Okay.
two units.
okay. That's great. Thank you. So I couldn't find that. I knew I'd seen it somewhere. And so, that's an interesting, thing to look at. When I worked on the bond issue for Lincoln Public Schools, we contemplated taking down Southeast High School versus improving it and looked at the cost differentials, and it's just something important to weigh. Thank you. Any other questions from anybody? No? Okay, thank you so much for being with us, Ms. Chin, and we appreciate your report and your willingness to come and be with us today. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, and next, we would like to have Mike Goertzen. Gertzen, okay, sorry, from Altus. Please come. And if you would spell your name for the record, we didn't really have Ms. Chin do that, but we know her spelling and everything. And just explain the company you're with.
German name from central Nebraska originally.
Okay,
Goertzen.
okay, thank you, Mr. Gertzen. And could you explain the company you're with and
Yeah,
how you're?
I'm with Altus Architectural Studios. We are a firm that specializes, I'm going to say 90% of our work is in the healthcare side of the business. And I've been with Altus for 4 years. Prior to that, I was with HDR for 30 years. So out of my 40-year career, 34 of it has been healthcare related. So
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
thank you.
And do you have a brief statement to start off with, or?
I'll just, I really don't, but I'll tell you what we did.
Okay, that'd be wonderful.
And how we kind of approached this. We were asked to come in and on the Lincoln Regional Center campus, which is on kind of the west, I'm going to say southwest portion of Lincoln. We were asked to look at buildings, evaluate, are there alternatives here for locating the PRTF in one of those. And then also there were some locations on site that may be alternative, I'm going to say no new buildings or new. So in our process, I brought in a team of engineers because we wanted to look at it as a whole. And we did a couple different walkthroughs of the buildings. One was more just getting our feet on the ground, understanding what was there, and then we came back the second time with looking at more of the detail. And I heard you asking about the tunnels. That's an incredible tunnel system underneath there. As I understand it, that tunnel system, just to kind of answer your question that you had earlier about the tunnels, I think, as I understand it, originally there was like food service, laundry, all those things that kind of served that campus when it was, I guess in the beginning. All of the, I'm going to call it back of house stuff happened underneath the tunnel. And with time, it's also used for the central utility plant. There's steam, hot water that fed all of the buildings. So that stuff is all there. It's, I'm not sure that I'd want to spend much time down there, but it's big, wide open spots, anywhere from 7 to 8 feet ceilings and they're probably 10 foot wide. So it's pretty wide space.
Okay, wonderful.
Okay. So we looked at the campus and we actually walked through almost every building. We did not walk through the administrative buildings. And, but we did look at, it's been since October since I did this. I gotta look at my numbers again. You know, we walked through building 14. We did not walk through 9. That was an administrative building. I walked through 10, 11. 7 is the old building that's standing there vacant. We walked through that, and building 3 and 5. We did not walk through 1. That's used by the corrections department. I believe is office space. So we looked at this thing to kind of figure out, okay, it's kind of difficult actually to kind of get my head around how to look at this because there's so many buildings and so many options. And I was trying to figure out, okay, how do I look at each building, come up with options and really kind of funnel it down. So in the end, I've got a couple of recommendations or options that might be more viable. And so the study wasn't as easy as I thought it was going to be coming in just because of the magnitude of looking at all these buildings. So we did look at, and I'm not sure how you want me to do this, but I can talk about really each of the 4 buildings plus the 2 sites that we looked at. So in doing that, I'll talk about the 2, I'm going to call it the 2 new sites last. So starting at the south end of the campus, building 5.
Mr. Gertzen, could you tell the page that you're on? Because I think
Oh.
people are looking.
Sure,
through
I
all these-
am page 6 of 38.
Okay, thank you.
Find it? Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, building 5, that one is, I'm not sure what they call that building. It's, of the buildings out there, I'm going to say it's probably the most secure of the buildings. It's a lot more security and how things are controlled and done in that building. Let's see if I flip to my just heading here. Building 5, it's called the Men's Forensic Psychiatric Services Building, MFS they refer to it as out there. It's a 56,000 square foot building. It was built in the 50s. And so in our look at that, it's kind of an odd shaped building. It's a bunch of Ys. And so when we did our evaluation, we looked at, okay, how could we put the program that Karen came back with, roughly 30,000 square feet, just rough numbers. And so I looked at how would I make this work? Because it's a 56,000 square foot building. We only really need in the 30s square footage. How does that all work? Because looking at the PRTF, that's an isolated healthcare group, and you really want to keep those patients separate. It's not a good idea to mix populations, and so after a little bit of thought, we somewhat discounted that building because what would you do with the rest of the square footage? All of a sudden, you got a bunch of building there that's not useful. So we kept our look at that building kind of pretty simple and a little bit high level. Then as you move up, I didn't look at building. I started on the bottom on that list on the left. One was the administrative building for correction services. So obviously we didn't look at that one. Building 3. Building 3 is called the acute men's. Building 3 was built again in the 50s. It's a 43,000 square foot building, multi-story. And we did look at that building and some options on how we could put this program in there. Now, one of the things that it does offer, I'm going to say it's to the the east side of the campus along Folsom Street. So, if you were running programs out of there, at least it has an access that you can get the patients from there to whatever programs, school programs, or whatever programs that you're running, maybe off campus. So that was probably one of the maybe advantages if you were to use this building. Now it is a little bit oversized. It would take a lot of work to come in and renovate it to anti-ligature and means of keeping the patients, we refer to them as patients, the patients safe within there. It's a multi-story, so there's some challenges that go along with being a multi-story building, and especially with the volumes that you're looking at, lower volumes. In that building, there's a couple wings, and so you'd have really, it kind of limited us to 2 bed areas, maybe on one floor, another bed area on another floor. So you have a lot of separation there. And as Larry had mentioned, or maybe it was Karen had mentioned that, being 1 story, there's the advantages of staff being able to control, monitor, and keep an eye on what's going on. And being a 3-story building, it's a lot more challenge. You would probably end up with the physical activity things that they do, putting those at the lower levels, getting access to a gym, and so you're having to move patients up and down vertically to get them to different things. And so there's a lot of challenges that go along with that. But I didn't want to rule anything out, so I took a look at that building. Building 7, I'll do 7 next. Building 7, that's, I don't know if you guys have been on that campus. There's an older building, and it's sat vacant, as I understand, for about 7 years. We entered through the front doors were locked, and the entrance was, we had to go down in the tunnels, come up and into the building. There's 1 stair in that building covering the whole thing. So from a fire standpoint, it's not a safe building. From a structural standpoint, I'm going to say that it's not a safe building. I was up on the 2nd floor. I walked from one area. There's a big open room that was on the north end. And I walked in there about 10 or 15 feet, and I stopped and I backed up. The floor was squishy, and from across the street, the building looks kind of cool. But you go inside, and it's evident to me that there's been a lot of termite damage. There's a lot of just structural things, with building sensitivity. Things just happen to them. Then to the west half of that building, it was an addition that was done in the 50s. Now that was where the central kitchen was that served the campus when it was, I guess, a higher number of occupants. Looking at the building, I think there's just a lot of things that would need to be done. And unfortunately, I think it's to the point where it's not a good viable option to renovate it. As I said, there's one stair. And then if you look at the stairs in today's world, from a code standpoint, we call it the 7-11 rule, 7-inch risers, 11-inch treads. That building was, I think, the 8-10 rule. So your stairs are steeper. People aren't used to walking on those. So there would have to be a tremendous amount of work to make that building viable. As I said, the windows were, just about every window I looked at was termite damage. Doors were damaged. The building is in pretty poor shape. So, and my option for that building was to tear it down and to build something new there. You'll see in your packet, there's a plan that I did just as a test fit. I took Karen's square footage and we put a 1-story on there just to see how it would fit, what it would do, and access, because these kids require, there's programs that they're off campus, they're on campus, they're bringing parents to campus. And so I looked at that too. Now, unfortunately for that location, you've got to go through the whole campus to get to the back of the building, because it's the back central part of the campus. Looking at building 10, that is currently the women's building. It's just had some renovations done. It's closer to square footage of the program piece. But again, that building, like building 3, is multi-story, so there's those challenges that you have to get a 28-bed unit that would be minimum probably 3 wings, 3 8-bed wings, and having good visibility, which makes it easier, helps with staffing and those kinds of things. But we looked at that building, and then building 14, building 9, we did not look at. That's an administrative office building. Building 14 is the building that now currently houses the sexual offenders. That building is pretty large, and I don't believe that they're using all of it, but I don't think that this is a patient group that you want to mix with that patient group. And again, so if you were to move into that building, you'd have to move that patient group out. Then what do you do with the building? It's pretty large. So then looking, as we go up the list, the old, I found out later it was called Building 15, the one that was demolished on the north end of the campus. I did a test fit to see there. One thing that I did look at there is, what was it, 4 or 5 years ago, Lincoln had the flood, the Salt Creek flooded. I did pull the FEMA maps, and we're kind of right on the edge, but it looked like to me that we can work around that, either do mitigating things that would accommodate that. But so there would be a way to fit a building of Karen's she program on there. I showed a little additional parking and really kind of to segregate that building from the rest of the campus. Now, one of the things that it offers is it's to the north end. Most of your traffic is probably going to come from the north end. And so either along Folsom or Prospect or Plaza would be the traffic. So it would keep that. But again, we want to, and then I think I showed like a line of trees to just visually create a site barrier, just because we just want to keep that population group. It's just not a good fit with them being around adults. So it would fit there. So then we took all that information. We sat down we used a cost consultant, and we put dollars to it. Now, that's the scary part. And when I say that is because, 3 months ago, we're starting to see today, we're starting to see construction costs kind of level out a little bit. We're still not sure where it's going because we've had a 6 or 6.5% escalation rate. And I think that construction costs have actually gone up at a greater rate than that. So we were a little nervous at putting dollars to the program, just not knowing where construction was going and wondering when is this going to slow down and be something that we can look at and say, okay, a year from now, we know that what the construction cost is probably going to be close to. Now, in those estimates that you'll find in the report, I did include, I'm going to call it more project costs. And when I say that, construction costs, that's the construction cost that it costs to build the building, the nuts and the bolts, and the screws and everything that holds this building together, the concrete. And I thought if somebody is looking at this from how do we fund this thing in the future, how do we make things happen, because you're going to have furniture that goes in there, you're going to have beds, you're going to have equipment. There's all those things that we kind of refer to as soft costs. And so I took and I looked at some historical data, and just from a percentage standpoint, I put some of that stuff in there. So just to make it easier to understand what you were looking at.
Thank you.
Yeah. Questions?
Appreciate it. Yes, Senator Art.
Thank you. So in summary, as I took a look at your report, building 3, 5, 7, 10, and 14 were renovation buildings. But I also noted, and you have notes on most of this, that if they're currently occupied, and those I believe are, there's no cost for moving the services or the patients that are in that area. So there will be additional cost to move those and relocate those to another area.
Exactly. And the reason because I don't have a program, I mean, if you were to move, I'll use one as women's as an example. So if you were to move the women's program out of building 10 and create another program somewhere else, whether that's a new building or you've got to accommodate. You're not going to build it to what it was built in the 50s or 70s. That was a 72 building, I believe. You're not going to build what you built in 1972. You've got to build it to what you're doing in today's care and looking to the future. So without a program and saying, instead of 40,000 square feet, they might need 50,000 square feet, just as an example. That obviously that extra 10,000 square feet is dollars. So I found it kind of hard trying to identify that cost, and that's why in there I said, if you were to relocate a program, there is going to be additional cost that drives that dollar.
So then you're really left with two options. You're left with demolishing building 7 and building a new PRTF,
Right.
or build on the old building 15 site. The building's already gone. The building is demolished. So really the difference in those costs is demolition.
Yeah, there's demolition costs.
Site work.
It's amazing that tunnel still goes to building 15. Now all the pipe when I walk through there, all of it have to come out. I'm not an environmental specialist, but just my years of looking at stuff, I'm guessing that all that pipe was wrapped in asbestos. So there'll be costs associated. So I tried to cover what I thought might take care of that.
So while there are, and then of course, if you remodel another area, you're going to end up with a PRTF that isn't today's standards either. You will compromise.
Yeah,
on
there's
that.
compromises because, and Karen hit on that, trying to do things at one level and trying to build in flexibility, on those 3 test fits that I did, I had 3 wings coming out. And so that kind of builds in some flexibility there. So depending on what your ratio is male to female, so you can adjust patients around. I know that those numbers can almost change daily, if not, weekly, if not daily. And so they can adjust that, and knowing that, there are certain patients, like Karen referenced, there may be some that should be teamed actually with somebody. If there's a patient that's maybe suicidal or something, they sometimes will team those with another just to keep them in the mix, So those two schemes actually were thinking about how do I do this, and being able to best utilize staff without having to add extra staff, but then also keeping in mind that we're thinking about the patient safety.
This is probably a question for Mr. Call, but I'm assuming that you took a look at the Lincoln Regional Center property because the PRTF would need to be licensed under a hospital.
Right, correct.
Correct?
Correct.
And so that's the logical place to put that in proximity to the hospital that will hold the license of the PRTF.
Correct.
Okay.
Now, that doesn't mean that it couldn't go somewhere else.
Yeah.
There's some administrative things that you would have to attach to it, if you will.
Right.
That goes along with
Including CMS regulations and
right.
distance from facility. And
Yeah,
all
CMS, FGI guidelines that go along with governing hospitals.
The other, I'm kind of getting in the weeds here a little bit, but the other question that is out there, and again, this is probably for the department, not for you, but there are some complicating factors to what's called an Institute of Mental Disease. There's an archaic federal regulation called for IMDs that we just want to make sure that we also do the research on that so that we don't trip into that accidentally. But that sometimes conflicts with PRTFs.
Yep.
So, thank you.
Thank you.
Done? Thank you. Any other questions? No questions? Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming
Patty.
today. Oh, sorry, Senator Wall, sorry.
I guess I do have a question. Sorry. So I just want to make sure, I'm trying to read through the report. This, the new facility would also provide all of the other services, the programmatic services right there in the building. Education would be within this building, recreation, mental health.
Recreation, like we've got a gymnasium that we have figured in there. And so Karen, in her program, had identified square footage for a gymnasium. So I got in a little more detail when I did the option or the building 7 replacement. But like I actually identified, okay, this box would be the gymnasium. And but we have all of that in there. And then I thought about how do we move patients in and out, because, say there's a program. Some kids may want to keep in a school program somewhere. How do we transport those? And so I thought about, which direction do I orientate this building? The building 7 option, I oriented it so that, there's actually some kind of nice views out there, but so I oriented the fingers, the bedrooms, more toward the south, but I put a tree line so that you wouldn't see building 5, and also to help keep that separation, the visual separation between the adult patients and the adolescent. Building 15 site, that's the one to the north. I oriented that so that the beds kind of faced more towards the northwest, and there's a nice tree line over there. And your environment that you're looking at is there's some studies that show that helps in care. And so how you set up your environment and making it peaceful helps maybe some of those that are a little more distracted or can be a little more agitated, if you can create some peaceful environment, it helps.
Okay, yes.
Just one other question. This, you have designed this as a locked facility, haven't you?
Correct.
Yeah, so it would have,
Yep.
it would have the key cards, it would have the security for a locked facility.
And that included, that was part of what drives the cost in these things. Anti-ligature stuff, all of those things that go into these kinds of buildings are, I'm going to say, not off the shelf.
Right.
And so those items tend to be a little more costly, like you want to put in a Windows system that'll take a certain impact load. And, so all that stuff factors in.
But much easier to do new than trying to retrofit the anti-ligature, which is what, of course, the department is going through with the hospital now.
And I've done that at other facilities, most of them are like smaller behavioral health units that might be in a hospital. And you end up going in and just about gutting everything and almost starting over because it's just so hard to put up the impact resistant chipboard and all those things that you have to do.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions? No? Thank you very much for being here today. We appreciate all your input and great work.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gertson. Okay, and next we have Al Povandra from CPW Architects. Welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, all.
And is it Povandra?
Yes, my name is Albert Povandra, Povondra. Nice Czech name from South Omaha. Good morning. I appreciate the opportunity to present our study to you. I suspect one of the reasons we were selected in the interview process is because Karen and I have been involved in youth for a long time in the state of Nebraska. We did the state juvenile master plan and the update. And about 10 years ago, one of our recommendations for the Yrtc campus was to replace the housing. And so there's a little background, insight into how we ended up with the recommendations that we did. The Yrtc Kearney campus is off the charts unusual, in my opinion. It is a wonderful place. It is. I mean, it's a college quad campus. Staff there has maintained it well, in spite of some of the buildings being built right after World War II. It has amenities that you don't necessarily see for youth. It's got a swimming pool, gym, large school, chapel. There's a vocational shop. It's got a lot of things that you don't normally see for youth, and it's terrific. The glaring problem with that facility, and again, we've been saying this for 10 years, is that the housing areas, there's actually 4 buildings that at one time had housing potential. Dixon Hall is probably the newest building, I think 1968. It's very institutional, kind of a detention, hardcore detention facility. Primarily used now as intake and initial evaluations. Then you have 2 large dormitory buildings, and on the second floor of the dormitory buildings, basically you're warehousing kids. They're in an open environment. There's little privacy at all. The gang toilet facilities on the lower level are remote from the sleeping rooms. There's very little privacy. So as you look at the campus in total, it's terrific, except for the housing units. And that was the focus of our recommendation. Our study had basically 3 components. One was Karen Chin, and I've worked with Karen Chin for 26 years, mostly all of Nebraska, on youth facilities. She basically did an assessment of, as you've seen in the study, of analysis of what type of youth you're holding there, how the the quantities dramatically dropped in the last 10 years. 10 years ago, you were doing 450 intakes during the year and dropped down to 83. So, and that is across the nation. It's youth, people just aren't locking up youth there's alternative programs, and the state of Nebraska is lucky that it's got some good alternative programs for youth rather than putting them in the Yrtc. So her tasks were to come up with an analysis of the type of youth that you're handling, coming up with a space program on solving the worst problem that you have on Yrtc, which is inadequate housing. My role in that was to basically look at the capital improvements, basically coming up with preliminary design, cost estimates. We had a professional cost estimator check my numbers. Always good to check an architect's numbers. Then we did a timeline. And there's a question about what's the timeline. The answer to that is that we're projecting this is about a 2.5 year process from you advertising to hiring an architect, designing the building, going out to bid, getting bids, going through the state procurement process of getting the contract going, and then building the facility. So it's about 2.5 year process is what we projected for that. And then the last component of which we had Matt Krause, a partner in our firm, headed a team of mechanical, electrical, and structural engineers to go through all the buildings and provide a detailed analysis. And you have that. There's a part of our study which is a summary of each building, and then there's a large appendix that has an evaluation of specific components in that. We talked about cost, and I'm trying to give you an executive summary here, and if you have specific questions after that, I'd be glad to ask. The cost for the recommended options was about $15 million, and basically it was about $13 million and change to build 2 housing units, each with 2 components in each housing structure, 12 beds, expandable to 14 beds on each side, so you can go from 48 to 56 beds, based upon if you use the double rooms that we have. A couple of the double rooms, most of the rooms are single occupancy. They have use to the outside, and again, any questions about the specific design, I'd be glad to answer. With that, I'd like to open it up to any questions that you may have on what we did in the study.
Thank you very much. Yes, Senator Arch.
So we learned quite a bit at Hastings, that the original construction was not adequate. So do you have additional costs in for different windows, different wall structure, that type of thing? I mean, what's the level of construction that you estimated?
This is a staffed secure facility, which means that it is not a maximum security facility. The doors are not necessarily locked. Generally, we try to put panic release. So if a kid wants to leave the housing unit at night, he pushes the panic bar, and there's a 15 or 30-second delay, and the alarm goes off. So staff has the ability to answer that. And as you know, on the Kearney campus, you spent some money recently to upgrade the security perimeter. So you've got a lot of steps in between. Being involved in the correctional youth facility for the state, the SARPI youth facility, the Northeast Nebraska youth facility, I am very aware of acting out kids and vandalism. So to answer your question is, this is designed and costed out as a vandal-resistant facility. On the other hand, and it's a challenge, on the other hand, it's meant to have a non-institutional home-like environment. These kids are going to be spending a lot of time in here. There's a lot of amenities that they can get to. They have their own private outdoor recreation that they can be sequestered in. There's a lot of natural light, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, vandalism and acting out and high abuse is considered in construction.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Oh, yes, Senator Lowe.
Thank you. And thank you for doing the design and everything. You said vandal resistant, not vandal proof.
I'm not sure there's anything that's super duper ultimately vandal proof. I work with the state of Nebraska, Department of Correctional Services. We do maximum security facilities. What I'm talking about is there's all kinds of levels. For instance, take a light fixture. There's all kinds of levels of protection that you can do at a light fixture. There's commercial vandal resistant, and then you get into the detention fixtures. And generally, I'm basically talking about the commercial grade vandal resistant fixture, which means that it doesn't have a glass lens. It has generally a Lexan lens. It can take pretty good abuse. One of the benefits of the housing units that we have is you're going to have pretty good staff supervision because they're not in an open warehouse wandering around. They're basically being supervised closely. Somebody was asking earlier, I heard about staffing and are we going to increase staff? And Karen's take was, no, you're not going to increase staff. And there are some efficiencies on the night shift, and that's true. There's enough money in the budget to do concrete block walls. There is enough money in the budget to do vandal resistant windows. There's enough money in the budget to do robust doors and frames and locks. If a kid is in his room and is kicking at the door and stuff like that, it will hold up for that.
Okay. We've toured Boys Town before, and at Boys Town they had very high ceilings, so that they weren't able to hit the fire sprinklers. Is that built into this also?
Yeah, so we would use detention grade sprinkler heads. Ligature is going to be a consideration for hardware. We don't want to prevent any suicide attempts as much as possible. So there's a whole range of vandal resistant and suicide resistant devices and fixtures that we'll use. We'll have all the the fire alarm warning bells and lights and stuff will be protected. So a lot of those things that happen in a normal correctional facility would be here. And again, the challenge is to try to make that work as a home environment. We use a lot of recently we use a lot of graphics, a lot of biphilic design where we're referring to nature with graphics that we put high up on walls that are not vandal resistant, but yet to try to create a different type of environment than an institutional environment in the interior.
I don't remember in the drawing, does each one of the individual rooms have its own restroom?
Yes, and that was a part of our discussion. And again, there's two schools of thought on that. One is, okay, I've got my bedroom, I got a toilet in it, and I got to look at the toilet. The other side of the fence is how convenient is that for use, and how safe is it for you to have to go to a gang toilet in a day room at night? So the decision was made with people that we were working with Larry and his folks and the folks at the Yrtc that they thought they would prefer they would be a wet room.
Okay. And would that room have multiple floor drains?
It will have a floor drain. Yes. There'll be a floor drain. If they flood the toilet, you're right, or sink or whatever, there will be a floor drain for that. Right?
Okay. My thought was because Boys Town had multiple drains, so that if they plug one out, the other one would also.
An overflow.
I thought that was a great idea. Because they're going to cause damage. They want to cause damage.
Yes, Senator
Thank you.
Halloran.
Thank you, Chairperson Pansy Brooks. Thanks for being here. Not to belabor the difference between vandal proof and vandal resistant, but at the Hastings facility, they started off with glass windows, and ultimately many of those were broken out, causing injuries to the person that did it. But subsequently, they put on a like a poly about a half-inch thick poly material to resist breakage. Is that what you're looking at here initially?
I would probably be thinking about, and again, when you get into the design process, you get into the minutia of all those details, we will suggest materials, and the user is going to help us decide what they feel is appropriate. We do give the pros and cons. To answer your question, what I would recommend is using a glass laminate polycarbonate, and that is a detention glazing. And what that is it's a piece of glass with sandwich, and you can make this different thicknesses based upon whether you want it to stop a 30-06 rifle bullet, or whether you want it to just handle impact from somebody with a hammer. But basically, it's glass and then several layers of polycarbonate, and then an outside layer of glass. And the reason we use the glass with polycarbonate is because if you use pure plastic, pure Lexan, it scratches. And over time, it becomes cloudy, and then it loses its effectiveness, et cetera. So glass laminate polycarbonate is the gold standard for high-end detention.
Okay, would it be transparent or translucent?
No, it's transparent. I mean, you can make it translucent, but I think from a perspective, if you're in your sleeping room, having the view, and you got a wonderful campus, having the view to the outside with all the nature that you have out there, I think where I would start would be going to make a transparent glass.
Thank you. Any other questions? No. Well, we appreciate your coming and doing all this work. How many have you done other facilities like this?
Yes.
And
I mentioned, originally we did the correctional youth facility, which was originally an HHS facility. John Hill ran that before the Department of Corrections took that over. So that turned into a much harder facility. Obviously, it's a different level of youth. A lot of them are tried as an adult. They go there. So we did that facility in 1995. It was the first project I did with Karen programmed that. I've done Sarpy County's Pat Thomas Youth Services area. I've done the Northeast Nebraska facility in Nebraska. We finished maybe 3 years ago a facility in Cheyenne, Wyoming for youth services. So we do adult facilities too. We do correctional facilities, but the youth facility is a different animal for me, and it has a completely different approach and philosophy. But it still does, having correctional background gives us the opportunity to be able to design elements within the youth facilities that can stand up to the use and still make it home-like and non-institutional.
so with some of those, could you explain the differences as you create between youth facilities? What are some of the things that you really look to do that are different than adult facilities?
Well, they're smaller.
Yes.
They're smaller. They have more programming and educational opportunities in them. They have, even in what we're proposing here, we have small little laundry units within it. And again, it's a lot of being accountable, trying to be accountable. There's obviously the staff ratio to youth is completely different. It's much higher. There's just more contact. A lot of things that, ironically, a lot of corrections swings now are trying to get into some of the beneficial things that we're doing in youth facilities, but it is still a completely different animal. It's not detention. It's basically looking at what Karen likes to say is a trauma-based design where you're trying to address the issues that kids have. And having my own kids, there's a lot of issues with kids. As most of you probably have kids.
And are you seeing a movement towards, and did this include an intentional movement towards not including rooms for solitary confinement? Because that's the trend across the nation, that they're only used for short-term purposes if the child is at imminent risk of harm to self or others.
We have in the program what's called a quiet room. And it's allowed to take, it's there to allow to take kids and put them in a timeout setting where they can calm down. It's a room that is furnished completely different than you think of solitary confinement. But if, for instance, if there's a fight or a kid is acting out or he's having really extreme issues, they can pull him away from the group, say during the day, and pull him out and get him to quiet down. He's right next to the staff area where staff can observe what's going on. And that's meant to be a short-term hold. That's meant to, okay, when you're calmed down, you're coming out, you're going back. So when we talked about Dixon Hall and the institutional look on that,
Yes.
that gets toward what you're talking about basically is more isolation, less staff contact, that type of thing.
Okay, thank you. I was just interested in that perspective. Yeah. Okay, I appreciate it. Any other questions for Mr.
Pavandra's a tough one,
Pavandra? Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your work. We really-
Thank you very
thank
much. I appreciate being here.
We appreciate
the
your
opportunity.
coming and explaining this to us and going through it a little bit. It's voluminous, as you know, so
Thank you.
thank you. Appreciate it. And next, we are going to have Jeannie Bradner from Probation, who's here today to give us an update on what's going on, and we're really grateful she's here too. Thank you, Ms. Bradner.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairperson Pansy Brooks and Chairperson Arch, as well as members of the Special Oversight and HHS committees. My name, as Senator mentioned, is Jeannie K. Bradner, JeanneBrandner. I am employed by the Nebraska Supreme Court's Administrative Office of the Courts and Probation as the Deputy Administrator overseeing juvenile services. I am here before you today to provide testimony regarding the two reports that have been being discussed. The first is the needs assessment cost analysis for the PRTF facility. The courts and probation are supportive of the recommendation to develop a state-run adolescent psychiatric residential treatment facility. While we certainly have a large emphasis on in-home and family-based services, there will always be a need for some high-risk, high-needs youth to be served by residential facilities. As the report writer articulated, private providers currently deny many of these youth, especially those that are high risk, high needs, that require this level of placement. Many times these denials are based on the youth had already previously been there and burnt bridges, display of aggressive behaviors, and these youth have experienced many traumas. Again, which is a very common basis for denials. The fact that youth continue to be placed outside Nebraska simply to access these high-end services demonstrates the deficiencies and lack of support for our youth in Nebraska. The need for an expanded residential treatment facility, a continuum of care continues to be stressed by us through our participation and partnership in many initiatives, such as the DHHS Division of Behavioral Health System of Care. Further, if you recall, one of the things that brought this forward is the courts have expressed frustration with the lack of adequate placements, as evidenced by court orders for youth to go to the adult facility at the Lincoln Regional Center for medication management, assessment, and stabilization. Clearly a practice that we know isn't best, but we're also struggling for some of these high-end youth that need medication management. Moving to the second report, the site evaluation cost analysis, the design, construction, mechanical, electrical cost components don't deal as much with my daily work, so I was very impressed by everyone's knowledge about those today. However, the foundational intent, purpose, and culture of the facilities is clearly a primary interest here. While the Project Advisory Committee did not specifically request input from the Administrative Office of Courts and Probation, we do collaborate on a quarterly basis with DHHS and a stakeholder group to talk about the Yrtc facilities specifically. Beginning on page 9 of that report, the report writer begins to compare our youth rehabilitation and treatment centers in Nebraska to juvenile correctional facilities. A lot of that conversation has occurred here today. This comparison demonstrates the ongoing identity crisis of our Yrtc facilities. While the Nebraska Juvenile Code specifies that juvenile court is rehabilitative and juvenile court adjudications are not convictions, our highest end state youth facilities should also comport with those standards. When we use the American Correctional Association's performance-based standards for juvenile correctional facilities, they are very specifically directed at secure facilities such as jails and prisons that provide safety and security in a controlled manner. Again, much of what was discussed here this morning. You might recall in the March 2021 DHHS Youth Facilities 5-year strategic plan, the stakeholder group that I mentioned earlier that continues to meet quarterly recommended that alternative accreditation and licensure options be looked into and be considered. I would also note that the reduced staff to youth ratio, the 1-to-4 during the wake hours and 1-to-6 is absolutely supported. And again, much of what was talked about previously to support programming, education, it's not just housing youth in their cells all day for security. Although it should be operationalized as a standard and not a goal as indicated in the report. Finally, if this proposal or components of it are implemented, priority should be given to the development of the Treatment and Youth Program Center. Without a robust continuum of skill development, therapeutic interventions, and family engagement, there will likely be little impact to future recidivism. In closing, the Administrative Office of the Courts and Probation continues to be committed collaborative partner with DHHS as Nebraska moves forward to improve youth facilities, staffing, and programming. Thank you for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here, Ms. Bradner. Yes, Senator Arch.
Thank you. The PRTF report, the needs assessment, showed that probation is the primary user of out-of-state placement compared to DHHS. Why is that?
Senator, there are several reasons for that, but if you think about the child welfare versus juvenile justice population, one of them is simply age. The youth in child welfare are predominantly younger youth, where we have older youth, teenage youth. And so the fact that they've had 14, 15 years of history, they've probably had a number of placements and things like that. So again, as they hit puberty, as the mental health conditions maybe become aware, the substance use starts, those types of things, it really is a prime time for those types of needs to be displayed, and they're developing their independence and revolting and those types of things too. So that is why that older population tends to have a higher rate of placement need.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Go ahead, Senator Waltz.
Thank you. I just have a quick question. Could you repeat your recommendations for the staff ratios?
I am just supporting what was in the report. Those numbers are lower than what a traditional PRTF facility requires by licensure, but, and let me get them here. 1-to-4 during wake hours and 1-to-6 at night is what is in that report.
Thank you.
And I believe those might even be operationalized now, potentially, in the facilities.
Yes.
Yes.
Any other questions? Okay, raising my hand to myself. Ms. Bradner, I was just interested in what your thoughts are regarding sending these kids out of state. Have you, I presume you've done studies about the impact on our Nebraska kids being sent out of state?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of, this has been discussed this morning. Thank you so much for asking the question, because there's been a number of individuals that ask, what is this population? Why are they going out of state? As I mentioned, some of these youth have already been in facilities in Nebraska and aren't welcome back. Some of them are displaying very aggressive behaviors, and some have very specific needs. Kind of those highest needs that we see are those juveniles who cause sexual harm, maybe those developmentally or intellectually disabled or lower functioning youth, and then the aggressive and trauma impacts, I think are the big ones. And so obviously, as many before me have mentioned, being out of state makes it much more difficult for the family component, for the youth to stay engaged in anything local, whether that be a church, whether that be even school, friends, family, those types of things. And so it is certainly our preference not to send youth out of state. Again, we primarily want to focus on in-home services, family services, because the other thing, and I think Senator Arch talked about this before too, is we don't want to just have a youth that is stabilized and return them back to a family environment that may or may not be ready for that youth, because 9.9 times out of 10, there are family issues as well. Even though many parents will say, it's the child, it's not me, there are dynamics within that family that impact that child's behavior. And so certainly having youth closer to home is easier for those therapy sessions, for whether it be long-term home visits. As we're getting closer to discharge, can the youth go home for 3 or 4 days? Well, if they're in South Carolina, that's not an option. But if they're here in Nebraska, there are certain things that we can do to titrate that. And as Senator Arch said, we don't typically step youth down. And I would relay that, just like if any one of us needed to be hospitalized for any condition, unless we needed additional long-term outpatient, not even outpatient, but inpatient services, we would go straight home. And so what we do is have them go home with supportive services at home, because there will still continue to be some needs. So we don't typically say, well, now that you're done at the PRTF level, you're going to go down at the group home level and so on. And again, wanting to get that youth and family back integrated in their community, because these are critical years in their developmental cycle. And so the longer they are away from those protective factors, certainly is not what we want to see for their development.
So thank you for that. So has there been any research either done by probation or someone else in Nebraska about the positive effects of sending these kids out of the state, the recidivism numbers, the comparison between kids who are kept here versus the kids that are sent out of state, programming differences?
Senator, that's a great question. That is not any research that we've done. We have not looked at differences for in-state, out-of-state. The only special work that we're doing currently is looking at our Yrtc population, those youth that are in either Kearney, Hastings, or Lincoln facilities in terms of recidivism compared to our population as normal, if you will, for youth on probation. But we have not looked at in-state, out-of-state, and those types of things.
Who would be willing or able or most able to do that? Because it seems like if we're sending these kids away at the tune of, was it 9 million? Is that right? Then if we're not getting any positive results, that's a lot of money to be sending kids out of state if we're not even sure. And I understand that you've said that these kids are kids that probably have been in the system multiple times, that this isn't necessarily their first time. But if that's so, and we're spending this much money, are we getting the bang for our buck?
Yeah, and it's certainly a great question. Who would be willing to look at that? I'm sure any researcher in the state would be willing to look at that. I think the difficulty comes, and we're finding this out too, in terms of looking at our Yrtc youth population. So I'm only saying that in comparison, is that, as you mentioned, it is hard to isolate. We don't typically have one child who has only gone out of state. So what really impacted the recidivism? Was it the family life before? Was it the 12 placements prior? Was it the out-of-state? It's really hard to isolate those experiences, but I'm sure there are some wonderful researchers in the state that would have an idea of how we might look at this, or how we might get populations that look similar in state versus out-of-state to be able to look at that. But it's certainly something that we have not pursued, and I'm not aware that DHHS has either currently or historically.
So the factors you've mentioned apply to any child if we're looking at recidivism, no matter what, the family
Absolutely.
and schools and abuse and all of those things. My concern is, would we have a cost savings? It's like if you put new windows in for energy efficiency, it costs more in the front, but then in the long run, you save money. So that's the question, and I think that's something the legislature should be interested in and that we need to go forward on. So anyway, thank you for your thoughts on that. Any other questions? Okay, Senator Lowe,
Sorry to
I'm
jump
glad.
in at the end, but thank you for being here. And you're talking about the recidivism with the YRTCs. I appreciate you looking into that because we don't want these kids going back into the system again. And so is that just within the YRTC system, or is it as they transition into being an adult and go on into adult incarceration? As far as that, and so the information flows both ways.
Great question, Senator Lowe, and the answer is yes. Because our courts and probation data we are able to look at both adult and juvenile court records. When we examine recidivism, we look at both of those instances. And so again, depending on projects, definitions, those types of things, we may not look into 25 years down the road, but given that time window, is there recidivism occurring? We do have access to both.
And that information is flowing back to DHHS, so they might be able to tweak the programming to help these kids to become upstanding citizens.
Yeah, this is a great question, Senator. This is the first time we've gone down this road. We do have a representative from DHHS on our work group that's doing this. I mean, this is current active right now with UNL that we're going down this route. So they are involved. I'm not, I don't know kind of next steps, or we don't have any, results or anything yet. We are really at the early stages of how do we do this, figure this out, what are the best practice standards, because the Supreme Court certainly has a recidivism definition, but we also want to say for this population, is there something else we should be looking at? So we are leaning on national partners to say, how should we examine this so that indeed it will be beneficial for us, whether it's the wrong kids are going, the wrong programming is happening. I don't know that we'll get those details, but we'll at least be able to have some information and then have some next steps.
Okay, thank you. And also, the counts at the YRTCs are down significant from 10 years ago. Because the youth are not being sent there because of other programs that are happening with those youth. Do you see that type of programming stays in place? And is it working now that we're not sending those youth to YRTCs? And as a follow-up, we're building 2 new cottages, maybe, on the YRTC campus in Kearney. Is that enough? Because we're looking at 56 units there with double occupancy.
Another great question, Senator Lowe. And our numbers in probation over the last, I've been in my position for 8 going on 9 years. The numbers since I've been here have declined drastically. I think when I first came in 2013, on any given day, we had approximately 3,500 youth on probation. Today, we're down to just right at 2,000 kids. And so part of that is there have been some improvements in the state over the years. Now, I will be the first to say we're not anywhere where we need to be, and every single day we hear about service deficits and those types of things. However, there was a great push in 2013, Senators Ashford, Senator Christ, and those pioneers that said, let's do something different and have this community-based aid dollars for youth to be able to have comprehensive diversion programs, for there to be community-based things that can happen in the community, so we don't have to have kids that may not necessarily need court involvement to come into court. So I would like to think that that's part of the equation. I also think as we get better about what kids need, that reduces the recidivism, so we have less kids coming back, those types of things. So our numbers have dropped drastically. The percentage of youth that continue to need kind of some of those high-end services have stayed the same, even though the number of kids have dropped. I don't know what that future may look like. I think one of the things that we have to be careful of is what happens sometimes is if you get good results at a facility or a service, then everybody says, well, it must be good, then everybody should go there. I think we have to continue to say the right kids need to go there for that service. And so, if we do that, again, according to the report, our population of youth in the state has increased, but that, as you've pointed out, the daily census, the number of kids on probation, all of those other things have fallen. So I don't know how to answer that because I just don't know what law changes will occur, what things, but if we continue as things are now, I feel pretty confident that those numbers are fairly stable.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Yes, Senator Kavanaugh.
Thank you. I feel like I would be remiss if I didn't take the opportunity to talk about a juvenile justice integrated data system, since that seems to be what we are talking about here. And I know you and I have worked on this before, and it's something that does actually exist potentially to come to the floor of the legislature at this upcoming session. So I just wanted the committee members to know that there's more that we as a body can do to move this forward and make it easier for you to have access to that data. So thank you for all your work.
Thank you, Senator.
Yeah, I have another question too. I was just, we are grateful to you, Ms. Bradner. Do the courts and do you, as head of probation, have an opinion on all of this? Do you feel like this is the way to go forward? Are you free to tell us that opinion? Do you think that we should be looking at something more like Missouri, where they have facilities all over the state, not just at one place like Kearney? I'm just interested in that perspective, because we're being given one plan and there could be other ways that we do this.
Yeah, that is a great question, Senator Pansy Brooks, and one that historically, again, I have been involved in over my time in Nebraska. And there are, as you likely know, a number of commissions, committees, and work groups in the state that have looked at that very question. We currently have, it's the Legislative Children's Commission that has a subgroup that is specifically for juvenile services. And in those groups, that Missouri model that you mentioned does come up as a very interesting model for the state. Is it something different? Is it something that would probably, in the implementation stages, finding buildings and those types of things cost more? Yes. But it goes back to, staffing. It goes back to programming. It goes back to those facilities where those kids are located. So if you are talking Kearney, those kids don't all come from Kearney. As a matter of fact, I think the majority of them come from Lincoln, Omaha, and so Douglas, Lancaster, and Madison County, which is in the northeast Nebraska area, I believe, were the top 3 counties that are referring kids there. And so it goes back to our earlier conversation. Is that most beneficial? Maybe, maybe not. It depends on if we put an emphasis on the family components. Even if we can get a family from Scottsbluff or from Norfolk to Kearney, that's a lot of time out of their day. And not to say that their kids aren't important, because certainly they are, but to balance that with other responsibilities, jobs, other children that they have and things, it would be much easier if they were closer to home, but I just don't know the reality of that. But it is definitely something that stakeholders have had a strong advocacy for since I have been back in Nebraska.
Okay, that's helpful. Do you think that some of the, the numbers are going down as you discussed, and both of our reports indicate that they're not sure if that's because of COVID or not? I would be surprised if it's COVID, but do you have a feeling for that?
There is absolutely some impact of COVID, but they were going down prior to COVID.
Yeah.
So I do think there's a little bit of both. The COVID impacts, the Yrtcs, PRTFs, whatever facility, as you can imagine, unlike the prisons that can't say, sorry, we don't have a bed or we don't have staff, these facilities can manage that front door a little bit better. So we have had halts where we've had facilities say to us, wait a minute, half of our staff is out in quarantine. we are not able to take any new kids in this week. So does that impact admissions? Absolutely. But I don't think that's the only impact. It is an impact. It ebbs and flows given the state of, the pandemic and the responses. And as immunizations rolled out, those types of things. But so I would say, yes, it impacts, but it was that decrease was happening prior to, and likely would still be there, maybe just not quite as low during some of those high pandemic times.
And then, thank you. And then my final question is, those kids that are out of state right now, are they out of state because of space mostly, or are they out of state because our state can't handle them?
They are out of state mostly because they have been denied placement in state. As I mentioned earlier, many of them maybe have already been in state and have been kicked out, if you will, or their behaviors were what our private providers would say, sorry, I've got other kids that might have less behaviors that I'm taking before this youth. And so they certainly are out of state for a variety of reasons. There are a few, as I mentioned earlier, that have some special needs that maybe we don't have in the state every now and then, but those aren't high numbers at all. And again, whether that's lower functioning, juveniles who cause sexually harm, those types, if we don't have a need in the state. We also don't have, and likely, Senator, with your work on this, any real specific work happening here for sex trafficking programs and facilities. And I know there are a lot of states working on that. So I don't know if currently we have any out for that, but that would be kind of one of those other special populations. I would be remiss too if I did not talk about, the gang youth. That a lot of times there is a thought of, can we temporarily remove them from that environment to get some therapeutic work done? And so that would also be kind of one of those other special populations. Historically, those youth have gone to a facility in Arizona, although even that facility has been less likely, or less willing, I should say, to take our youth there. They are wanting to move more to a child welfare population instead of juvenile justice. So it's a tough population. It absolutely, I'm not going to say it's easy. It certainly is a tough population. And so that's what we're up against when there's waiting lists.
So what % of those kids are kids of specialty needs like gangs or something that we can't handle very easily?
Well, I think that would, I don't know. I don't have that answer for you today. I know Senator Arch also mentioned, again, a facility in Omaha, Dr. Giuliano's facility that he is developing that is as has been referred to as a enhanced group home maybe, that will be, in my understanding, able to accommodate some of those populations. So I think those pieces will help. And again, it's a moving target because it's always a snapshot in time, because we certainly have some gang youth, some kids who cause sexual harm, some aggressive youth in the state as well. And so while they might be here today, tomorrow they may be out of state. So saying what specialty that is, I would say the majority of them are generally, I mean, all of them, because we always look in-state first, have been denied in Nebraska.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank
Ms.
you.
Ratner. Appreciate it always, and you're doing a great job with probation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, I don't think we have any other testifiers that we've planned on, so we appreciate everybody coming here today for updating us on these reports. We're very grateful for that. Thank you for being here to COO call. And with that, I think we close today's hearing on Yrtcs. Thank you very much. Have